everyone. I hope you are all well. Today we are going to cover the heavy yet fascinating topic of eating disorders or disordered eating behavior, and more specifically, how disordered eating affects nutrition intakes of adolescents. Alrighty, I think some context is necessary before we begin to form a sort of baseline that we can refer to throughout the video. First of all, and most importantly, we need to establish what I am talking about when I say eating disorder. We need a definition. According to the International Institute of Health, an eating disorder is a serious illness marked by severe disturbances in a person's eating behaviors. Now, this definition obviously covers a wide range of behaviors that can all be considered disordered. So, for the sake of time, I have chosen sources that go in depth on just 3 particular eating disorders. The first one is called anorexia nervosa, or AN. Anorexia stems from an all-consuming fear of gaining weight. Symptoms include body dysmorphia, drastic weight loss, low BMI, malnutrition, irritability, isolation, etc. The second disorder I'll be talking about today is called binge eating disorder, or BED. This is the opposite extreme from anorexia. People who have binge eating disorder tend to eat abnormally large amounts of food, feel out of control when they eat, intense feelings of distress, the inability to stop, and the habit of eating in secret. The last disorder I'll be covering today is called avoidant or restrictive food intake disorder, more commonly known as ARFID. ARFID individuals show aversion to certain foods based on texture, smell, appearance, or temperature. Those are the most common factors, however, there are many others. ARFID individuals also show anxiety around most foods, or they simply forget to eat. All of these symptoms, however, lead to severe malnourishment. Before we really get into the nitty-gritty of this video, I do want to give a quick disclaimer. Anorexia, binge eating, and ARFID are 3 of the disorders that are the most common, and those 3 are the ones that I will be referring to throughout the entire video. However, there are so many more disordered eating patterns and disorders that I am not addressing today. There are just simply way too many to go over in one video. It would take all night long. Furthermore, I also realize that I have simplified the definitions of both eating disorder and the specific ones, such as anorexia. Again, this is just too complex of a subject to condense into a 5-minute video, so for the sake of time, I am trying to keep it as simple and comprehensible as possible. Moving on. So, obviously we know that there will be differences in nutritional intake among kids with and without eating disorders, and also among the different eating disorders. However, the question is, what are those differences? That brings about my research question. What are the differences between macronutrient and micronutrient intake among adolescents who have disordered eating behaviors? I wanted to hone in on adolescents because 76% of the United States eating disorder population begins their development of an eating disorder in the adolescent stage, which is 10 to 19 years old. We are going to dive into the data now, the meat and potatoes of the video finally. I have a little table of contents. We are going to be looking at 3 studies. The first one has to do with anorexia patients versus healthy patients. The second one is binge eating disorder patients versus healthy patients. And the last one is ARFID patients versus healthy patients. Study number 1. Nutrient intake. Girls with anorexia nervosa and healthy girls. This was a cross-sectional study. It took place in the Boston area. There were 79 girls. Half had anorexia and half did not. All of the girls filled out a very detailed food log for 3 days, and then after they submitted them, the researchers then analyzed all of them. Some key takeaways here. The girls with anorexia were confirmed to A. Consume more of their daily intake from protein and carbs than the healthy group. B. Consume less of their daily intake from fats than the healthy group. C. Consume more dietary fiber than the healthy group. And D. Have higher levels of almost every vitamin. However, all of the anorexia patients got most of their vitamins from supplements rather than their diet. On the contrary, The healthy group got almost all of their vitamins from diet alone. The why does it matter at the bottom of the page is very important, and we will circle back to that at the end of the video. However, I challenge you to think, why does this matter? Why does it matter that people with anorexia have less fat intake than those without, or more protein intake, or more fiber? Study number 2, nutritional adequacy ratios in women with and without binge eating disorder. This was a larger study of the same format. There were 180 women, 75 were diagnosed with binge eating, and 105 were not. Key takeaways from this one. They might be surprising to some of you. 1. The binge eating group showed higher levels of carbs, saturated fats, protein, and added sugar than the non-binge eating group. Second takeaway, the binge eating group showed lower levels of unsaturated fats and all vitamins except retinol. Another takeaway, the odds of having binge eating was 11% less in patients that are micronutrient adequate. And the last takeaway, people with binge eating are much more likely to be nutrient deficient than people without binge eating disorder. This last one might be counterintuitive to some of you, but yes, it is true. There is such a stigma around people that are overweight or people with binge eating disorder, and most people might assume that people who struggle with binge eating have to meet their daily intake because they are just eating nonstop. This is not true, and there needs to be abolition of the stigma. Our last study is assessing macro and micronutrient intake among adolescents with ARFID. This was the same size as the first study, about 40 people, 20 with ARFID, 20 without. These were young children. Still in the adolescent range, about 11 to 14 years old. Key takeaways. The results for the ARFID group were associated with significantly lower energy intake than those without, as you can see on the chart to the right. The small blue triangle is the ARFID energy intake, and then the dotted gray lines represent the quote-unquote normal eating kids. Only 65% of ARFID kids met their nutrient requirements compared to 99% of the kids without ARFID. Another takeaway, the ARFID group consumed significantly less protein than the control group or the healthy group. And lastly, as hypothesized by me and probably most of you, the ARFID group had consistently lower levels of vitamins as well, but especially vitamin B1, B2, C, and K. Why does this matter? Analyzing and studying nutritional intake differences among adolescents especially is important and urgent. Unfortunately, eating disorders are not going anywhere, or at least that's what the data tells us. They are more rampant than ever, especially among young women, but even young boys as well. I'm sure a lot of doctors would not assume that women with binge eating disorder are more likely to be vitamin K deficient than those that are healthy. This is not something intuitive. This can only be learned if we look at the data and continue to do more research. Even for ARFID, which is usually treated with more intensity, given that ARFID most commonly leads to malnutrition, they might not look too closely at the protein deficiency that is very clear among adolescents with this disorder. So overall, all three disorders, even though they are very different, they all show rampant deficiencies in either macronutrients or micronutrients. If doctors, dietitians, and other medical professionals could implement the practice of analyzing which nutrients kids are lacking instead of solely focusing on energy intake, then these young adults would have a much easier chance at recovering and living a long, healthy life. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great morning, evening, or night.